I'm Cabot Phillips with Campus Reform. I'm joined now by Gabe Nadales of the Leadership Institute. Gabe, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Want to talk to you about your transformation, going from a radical leftist member of Antifa to now a free speech advocate, someone that's on college campuses defending students' constitutional rights on a daily basis. So I think it's important for us to start at the beginning.
Sure.
Your political involvement, what got you involved in politics and led up to you coming to that place in life?
Well, before we start that, I really think it's important to mention what Antifa is. Antifa is not an organization, so a lot of people think it's this group that has meetings. No. Antifa is made up of a lot of different organizations, and Antifa is more of a rally cry. The black mask is more of a uniform where you have a goal and you try to enact it as a group. So unfortunately, what you're left with is a mob mentality. And how did I get involved in politics? It was way back in 2009 when Governor Schwarzenegger was cutting the arts and was cutting funding for schools. And I thought that I should do something about that because I didn't want to have my favorite teacher get fired. That's really how it started. But honestly, my radical activism didn't start until 2010 when I refused to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Why was that? Why didn't you stand for the pledge? What was going through your head?
At the time, I remember that I didn't believe in America. And I believed that it was basically a fascist nation. So I didn't want to literally be forced to stand up for something I didn't believe. And of course, I got in trouble, but I used the Constitution, which is ironic, to get away with it.
Yeah. And so what were your main grievances with the United States? You didn't stand for the pledge. Were you being edgy, or was it actually substantive if you said, I don't believe in America, all of these things? What were your grievances?
Well, at the time, I remember that there was a lot of government bailouts of banks, and I thought that that was a problem with capitalism. I didn't understand that that was a form of cronyism, and it was actually a government's fault, not capitalism. And on top of that, there was a lot of other things that we were going to war, and I heard all this propaganda about how we were just invading a bunch of different countries for oil, which is all propaganda now I see. And it's just been a lot of different things. Yeah. At the time, it was more of things that were out there for me, but it wasn't a defining ideology.
Yeah, so some people would say it's radical not to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance, but that's not as radical as actually going out and joining a group like Antifa. So what led up to that specific involvement?
So I remember the first time I went to a rally was actually against neo-Nazis. I remember in 2010 they attended Claremont, and I went there with a friend, and that's how it started. I started going more and more protests and more marches. At some point I even organized some of them, not organized them as like the whole, but I organized to have a presence there with a lot of people involved. Yeah. So I would recruit people, I would call them and say, hey, who can make it? How do we get there? Who can pay for gas? Who has a car? All these different details. I was definitely organizing a lot of activists on the left at the time.
And so it started with a protest that a lot of people can get behind, of something protesting legitimate neo-Nazis. Yeah. And then you talk about how it transitions into protesting so many different people and giving them that label of Nazi, calling everyone a fascist, calling everyone a Nazi, even when they aren't. What was that transition like?
See, the problem, it was very easy for me to go up to somebody holding a swastika and yell at them. Incredibly simple. Yeah. But then after, when we went to other protests and we did other things, I was just told they're the same. They try to equate some people who were peaceful people who we just had disagreements with, and there's neo-Nazis. So it was more of a transition. Now, if you had told me to go yell at the people who are peaceful, I would have been like, no, I wouldn't do it. But there was a transition that we try to equate everybody in the same boat as these other hateful people.
Yeah, and I think that's a tactic that's still being used right now on the far left, of saying, okay, if we can get everyone to agree that Nazis are bad, far left or far crazy far right radicals are bad, fascists are bad. Okay, we all agree on that? Yep. Great. Now all we have to do is expand the definition of what we label those things.
It is, and it's really easy. I remember, as a matter of fact, once I was a conservative. I was at California State University, Los Angeles, and it was near a riot when Ben Shapiro spoke. And I remember talking to a few students out there. As a person of color, I can get away with like talking to the left. I'd still do that routinely just to hear what they have to say. There was this girl there, and she was a student, and she told me that Ben Shapiro was a neo-Nazi and that he hated black people and he hated Jews. And I'm like, he's Jewish. And this is the mentality that Antifa and all these organizations have. It's not just that you disagree with them, it's that they are the most hateful person that you can probably think of. and this is why we should protest against them.
Yeah, and so you started organizing protests, organizing riots, whatever you want to call them. What was your experience like behind the mask? So you're masking up. We see pictures. We have some pictures here on the screen of your involvement. What was going through your head when you're looking out at the other side, and what was your goal?
It really depends what the protest was for. I mean, but it's either to shut them down or to drive them out of the city or to force them to change policies. I remember there was a time where we protested a CEO in his Newport Beach home, and we were yelling obscenities out at him. And the funny part is he wasn't there, and we knew he wasn't there.
Yeah.
Because it was never to yell at him or make him listen to us. It was for us to annoy the neighbors, to all these little children learning bad words from us. So then once we're gone, the neighbors could go knock on his door and say, you need to do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah.
And this is the way Antifa is. We don't care about, or they don't care about arguing with you, having a conversation. They want to shut you down, or if you don't want to change your ways, you need to get out of the city.
Yeah. And so you talk about this mentality, by any means necessary, as some people know it now. What did that mean to you at the time, by any means necessary?
By any means necessary. It's pretty harsh. At the time, I didn't really think about it in the terms of like open warfare or, even taking up arms. But it did allow me to accept destruction of property. As a matter of fact, I even saw a cop get punched once by one of my friends. And it was just very acceptable for us to do this, because if they were defending fascists, then they deserve to be punched.
And so that didn't bother you?
No, it didn't bug me, at the time at least.
Because they were equated with fascism in your mind, and any means necessary.
I mean, there's this thing that says, like, sure, if they're actual Nazis and they're actually trying to kill people, then you have to take up arms. Obviously, a lot of people are not. But if they're really trying to do harm to others, like physical harm to others, then we should stand up to them and we should act with violence, but only to defend ourselves. And what Antifa does is that they are the ones starting the violence.
Yeah, and so did that bother you? Were there parts where you would come back from a protest, you will have seen violence up close, you will have seen threats and intimidation? Were you bothered at the time, or did you feel like you were this warrior for a good cause?
We just laughed about it. We would tell the stories like, oh, did you see that? And we'd laugh about it. And nobody really said anything, criticized it, because everybody was pretty much okay with it. Yeah. At the time, it was just like this big joke, like, oh yeah, we stood up against cops, we stood up against all these people. It just seemed like a big joke. And
you touched earlier on the mob mentality.
Yeah.
How did that manifest itself?
We were all just okay with the idea of like tearing. We were okay with the idea of just destroying property. As a matter of fact, there is a song by Osrodden, which is from this band. It's called "They Ignore a Peaceful Protest," and in the song, it actually says, if they ignore a peaceful protest, they can't ignore a burning police car. They can't ignore rocks and bricks. And this is the mentality that everyone had. If the media is going to ignore what we're trying to do, well, we're going to force them to cover us.
Yeah. Were there moments you were scared?
Yeah. There was one time where we were trying to break down a door, and I was right there at the front, like hitting the door, trying to break it down. And there was an officer on a horse, and I remember that he was trying to disperse the crowd, etc. And I didn't realize it at the time until I found a video of it much later on. But my friend just pulled me away, and he hugged me, and he just pulled me, and I was in shock because I'm like, oh shoot, I'm gonna get arrested. But it was just my friend, and I probably would have been hit by the horse because it was coming pretty fast.
So it was looking back.
Yeah, looking back, it's one of those things. You kind of think about those things, and I don't even know how I used to do that stuff.
Yeah. And so what led to the change? What were the moments where you started to say, maybe this whole crazy Antifa thing isn't for me? What were those moments like?
It really goes into high school. And I remember in high school, I started reading, I was failing my econ class. So I started reading my econ
Some people
book.
watching might not find that as a surprise after hearing what group you were in.
Yeah, so I actually started reading my econ book. So I learned a lot of different things. And I remember I got to be in the class, so that was pretty cool. But I took those ideas home, and I took them to a lot of my friends. I would ask them a lot of different questions about them. I'm like, oh, well, what do you think about free markets and all these things? I think they make sense if we do this. And instead of saying, having a conversation or saying, no, free markets don't work because A, B, C, or whatever, they called me names. First time as an anarchist I'd ever been called a capitalist pig.
All because you were raising questions.
Literally just raising questions. I wasn't even advocating it.
Yeah.
I was literally challenging just beliefs, because I think it's very important for us to challenge our beliefs to make sure that we actually have a strong argument. And they weren't about that. They started calling me names, and they said that I needed to shut up.
So that made you question the legitimacy of the movement, I guess,
really
of if you can't question yourself, how are you going to grow? How are you going to become stronger?
Yeah. Because the only types of criticisms that the left really takes, at least the Antifa and all these organizations, is criticisms from the left. Or if they are very much leftist, or I remember one specific one, we would talk about personal property versus private property. In my mind today, I think they're the same thing. But they would say, oh, you can own your toothbrush, but you can't own a house. And those are the types of debates that would be in a very narrow ideological field. But if they said, well, what if you can own a house, or what if the free markets are good, then you're a fascist.
Yeah. So you started to have these questions, moments of doubt. When did that actually lead to you saying, I don't want to be in this group anymore? When did your personal philosophy and your actions start to change?
As a matter of fact, I was still a leftist all into college, but I started looking into a lot of online resources, and I remember I requested information online, and that's when the Leadership Institute found me. Adam Weinberg is somebody that I still give him a call from time to time and thank him and just see what he's up to.
Yeah. So that changed the trajectory of your life.
It really did, because I mean, I remember one time I went into Pasadena, and I went into a bookstore, and I went in and asked, hey, do you guys have any radical literature? And then they were like, well, what kind of radical are you thinking? He was about to go show me the Communist Manifesto, et cetera. And I said, the Federalist Papers. That was my mindset back then.
That was radical for you?
Yeah, for me, radical. And the founding of our nation was radical, and the ideas behind that. And I remember that Adam, every time I would have a question from the left or from the right, he wouldn't call me names. He wouldn't tell me that that was wrong. He would listen, and he would say, well, that's interesting, but have you ever thought of this? Or have you ever thought of that? And he gave me the Law, which I think is a great book.
Yeah. And so that it was the steady transition.
So
it wasn't even a light bulb moment. It was the more you read.
The more I read, the more I talked to conservatives, the more I understood what they were trying to say.
And so when did you realize the ideas of free speech, meaning we have an exchange of ideas, not meaning I'm going to use my power, my speech to silence you, which is what you were doing at the time. What was that realization of the importance of the First Amendment and free speech like?
That was when my college tried silencing me.
What happened?
As I mentioned, I started a Young Americans for Liberty chapter. And I remember that the student government advisor told our advisor to not be our advisor. And she, I don't know exactly what she said, but I remember they had a conversation. He told me that he couldn't be our advisor anymore because we were doing something wrong, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they tried to do thing after thing to try to silence us, whether it be making it difficult for us to get recognized, making it difficult for us to have an event, or even they threatened us with a legal lawsuit at one point. Yeah. They kept doing that.
So when you look back on your time on the radical left, when you see those pictures that we showed earlier, what comes to mind? What's your thought?
I am an incredibly different person I am than from that time. And I can't believe that I used to do all that. It doesn't make sense to me why I would put on a mask and yell obscenity at that person. I don't even cuss nowadays, like at all. Yeah. And like now I used to do it in front of to some random person I didn't know in front of a bunch of children playing on their front yards.
Shock factor.
Yeah, I don't understand why it would make me do that and be so hateful.
Yeah, so that's all in your past now. What's your present? What are you doing right now to make campuses a better place and defend free speech?
So I'm really happy about what I do now. I help conservative students in California and throughout the nation, really. I help them fight back against liberal bias against their schools.
Did you ever think you'd be doing that?
No, there's no way. I mean, I at the time, I remember when I was in Antifa, I wanted to be a musician. I know how to play multiple instruments, and I wanted to be a music composer. And just getting involved into defending conservatives, which is something that at the time I hated, there's no way I could ever see myself doing this.
Yeah, and so what's the best part of your job?
My best part of my job is that multiple times at multiple different universities, small, private, big state schools and major schools like Berkeley, I've gotten phone calls and I've gotten messages and handwritten letters from students, like just thanking me, saying that they felt scared and they were able to fight back against the bias that they faced because of what I did and what the Leadership Institute does.
What would your message be to high school you before you ever got involved in any of this? What do you wish you could have told yourself then?
Just listen. Listen to other people. Don't be so narrow-minded. And if you feel that something's wrong or that you have a little bit of a doubt of something, speak out. Because the moment I started speaking out is the moment that I realized that my allies weren't my friends.
All right, we'll leave it there. Gabriel Nadales, thanks so much for this important conversation, hopefully one that people will learn from. And thank you for all the work you're doing right now to make campuses a better place.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I'm Cabot Phillips with Campus Reform. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to donate to help us make more videos just like that, you can click right here. And if you want to be the first person to see all of our new content, click the subscribe button right here. Please, click one of them. Doesn't have to be both. One or the other. Okay, thanks.